Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. And the passage goes on talking about the blessings. Let's pray. Our Father, we pray that you would make us faithful in this high and holy calling you've given us. I thank you that you have chosen to work in this way. We thank you that you have called us to be your people, and you have given us children to raise in the fear and admonition of the Lord. I pray you would strengthen our minds and our hearts and our hands to do so. Give us wisdom as we discuss these things. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. So the duties of a parent to educate. That's roughly what we're talking about. This will have several different parts to it. We will talk about big picture. What does it mean to, what is education? Why is the duty of education given to the parents? We'll talk about what does that look like when they're real small, which will be practical, disciplined things. And then at the end, we will look at what is education in the more formal sense look like. But the reason why I bring up this passage, why is this formative for us, is because the vision that it gives us is, first of all, covenantal. It's saying, you are my people. God is saying, you are my people. Here is my law. Here is my gracious gift of my law to you. Now, you have a responsibility. What is your responsibility? To obey. And to teach your son to obey. And his sons to obey. So I'm choosing to work through your covenant family. But then, so you have this covenantal structure. And why? Well, for blessing. Again, you obey, and you're entering a land of milk and honey. There will be blessing. If you disobey, there will be curses. Right? The blessing and curses aspect, we come back to this again and again. But also, this vision of education that Deuteronomy 6 gives us is the whole world. Right? It's not just the formal education, sitting down, reading a book. But what it describes is the whole world your child lives in. Okay? You are not just giving them didactic instruction, but rather you are shaping the entire world for them. You are educating them when you sit down and when you rise and when you go out and when you come in. Right? The education that they should have from you ought to be as if the law were written on your hands. All that you do is just saturated in the law of God. All that you do is saturated in what God requires of us, who God is. You should write them on the doorposts of your houses, right? So anytime you walk into your house, the law of God, right? God's righteous standard. God's mercy towards his people, right? This should be the whole world that they swim in. Okay, the whole world they inhabit should be defined by the law of God, right? And when I say the law, be clear, I mean God's gracious gift to us of his instruction, right? For our good and his glory, right? This is not legalism. This is holiness. This is not Pharisaical observance of regulation. This is joy. Where does joy come from? Joy comes from obeying God. How do we obey God? Right? You obey God by obeying what he tells us to do. So, this big picture of education is essential for us to get. Is that just an Old Testament thing? Negatory. Let's look at Ephesians, another passage that we've come back to again and again. But Ephesians chapter 6. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. We'll come back to that. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise. So going back to the Old Testament, New Testament question, hey, right in the middle of Paul's New Testament instruction to fathers and to children is a quotation, copied and pasted, from the Decalogue, from the moral law, right? And it says, this is the first commandment with a promise that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. He's saying there's continuity between how things were and how things are. Why do children obey? Why ought children to obey? So that they'll be blessed. How do we know they'll be blessed? Because God said it back then. And it's true now too. Okay, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, which we could dwell on probably more than we will, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Those phrases, or those words, discipline and instruction, can be misleading, but kind of opaque to us. What do they mean? The Greek word used for instruction is paideia, which is used throughout the scriptures as instruction most of the time. That's how it's translated. But in the broader culture, right, in the Greek world this was delivered to, right, Ephesus being a Greek city, what did paideia mean? It meant the whole world. It meant a world view. It meant education, not just in like, sit down and read this book, kid, but it means the whole philosophy of what we do and why we do, right? Of what is culture, what is art, what is knowledge, right? That's what paideia gets at. So by saying, fathers, bring up your children in the discipline and paideia of the Lord, well, it implies that there's a paideia of the Lord. There is a Christian world, just like there was a world that the Deuteronomy 6 passage was describing, right? This is when you sit, when you rise, when you go out, when you come in, no matter what you do, all of this fits into the world God made, and thus you have obligations in it. So, fathers are given the task of providing a Christian education for their children. And again, this is not limited to read these books. It is not limited to just your 9 to 5, or what is it? When do schools go now? 8 to 3? Whatever. To those hours. But this is the whole world. You are to interpret the whole world in subjection to Christ for your children. Okay. There is no neutrality anywhere. Right? It's not like in Deuteronomy 6, Moses said, you are supposed to go and tell your children about, the special things of God. Right? But, and everything else is just sort of, do what you want, right? Egyptians had some cool stuff going, that was probably fine. Right? It doesn't say to give them a knowledge only of the scriptures, though that is true. It says to give them a whole world, a full-orbed philosophy of life, in subjection to Christ. Right. So there is no neutrality. There's no square inch. I think it's Abraham Kuyper who says that every square inch of the cosmos is claimed by Christ and counterclaimed by Satan. Right? There is no place for, there's no man's land. So, the duties of parents to educate is a huge task. Right? It's not simply about reading a set of books. It's not simply about going to a particular school. But it's a forming of the whole person. And as such, I think it's instructive and essential to begin with the end in mind. You're forming a person. Again, we come back to this again and again. The children are immortal souls, right? You are training and shaping and chiseling and molding them, as is your God-given prerogative and duty. You are shaping them, and they're going to live forever as you have shaped them. So you are looking at a 2-year-old, and you're thinking, okay, how do I educate a 2-year-old? Begin with the end in mind. Look and see the 18-year-old. What do I have to do in order to have my 18-year-old be in subjection to Christ? What do I have to do for my 18-year-old to love the standard of God? What do I have to do for my 18-year-old to be a joyful, intelligent, virtuous person? Right. Okay, so then trace it backwards. Right. But this is a huge, monumental task. We are shaping immortal souls. We are conforming them to Christ, or rather, we are the means by which Christ is conforming them to himself. We also have to understand, as Tyler mentioned earlier, where does even even knowledge begin? Knowledge begins with the fear of the Lord. And not just the fear of the Lord in some abstract sense. Colossians chapter 2 says specifically that, Josh can't find Colossians, there we are. For I want you to know how great a struggle I have for you and for all those at Laodicea and for all who have not seen me face to face, that your hearts may be encouraged, being knit together in love, to reach all the riches of full assurance of understanding of the knowledge of God's mystery, which is Christ, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. Where is all the wisdom and knowledge? Where is the fear of the Lord? The fear of the Lord is found in Christ. It's found in subjection to Christ. So, how do you unlock the mysteries of the world? How do you understand what's going on in any area? It's in subjection to Christ or not. Okay. Related to this, so that's the positive example. In Christ are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. So you subject yourself to Christ, and that's the beginning place by which you understand the world and all that he has made, right? And how people interact, and what is art, and what is literature, and what is science. But we are given another negative example in Romans chapter 1. Romans chapter 1, verse 18, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth that they know. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world, in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. But they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools. Where does rejection of God lead to? It leads to folly, futility, right? Claiming to be wise but being fools. And this is more apparent in our age than maybe ever in living memory, right? It's more evident now than it has been for hundreds of years, that the rejection of God leads to futility of thought and folly. Claiming to be wise, they became fools. Claiming to see clearly, they no longer see the difference between boys and girls, which is maybe the most obvious of things. Right? Claiming to be wise, they became fools. Rejecting the objective truth of God, suppressing that truth, we see the horror, the degradation, the misery, the folly that has flown from it. It's more obvious now than it ever has been. So, what is the antidote? The antidote is subjection to Christ in all things. As was said last night, my degree is in physics. I've spent the last 8 years teaching physics and trying to understand what does it mean to teach physics in subjection to Christ. Right? And what I've come to realize is it's essential to teach physics in subjection to Christ. And you have to begin with gratitude, right? Which is an acknowledgement of God's work, right, as creator. And if you don't do that, again, we live in this myth of neutrality. We think that certain things like the maths and the sciences work kind of regardless of whether there's a God or not, right? And I can go to my secular school and I can learn about, the Newton's laws, and it's basically the same as I would learn anywhere else. And is there a sense in which that's true? Is there a sense in which there is general revelation that we have access to, that the unbeliever has access to? Yes. Is that true in a sense? Yes. But you cannot avoid the fact that in Christ is hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge, that if you do not fear God, then you can't put the whole world together rightly. And so what you're left with, again, I want to stress that, the idea that education is building a whole person, education is building a whole worldview. And so what you get, if you ignore that, is you get a bunch of building blocks, each one true in itself, but with no idea of how to put them together. You have no integration. You have Legos on the floor, but no structure. So, it is essential for the duty, or for fathers to fulfill their duty of giving a Christian education to their children. It is essential for them to begin with subjection to Christ and the rejection of the myth of neutrality, the secular myth. Okay. Now, we'll talk about the formal education aspect of that in a little bit. But first, all of your children are quite small. So let's talk about the practical education that begins at home, right? And not just family worship, although that's essential as well. But you are shaping them. You are training them. You are explaining the world to them, beginning from when they come home from the hospital. Again, as a physics teacher, a depressing thing that I came to realize a couple years into teaching, by the time they get to me, they've already learned or not learned everything worth knowing. Rats. You know, I'm putting icing on the cake, right? But the truly essential things, the things that really shape your understanding of the world, happen in those early years. Right? Those are the key times. And then the concrete gets harder and harder and harder as time goes on. I think Tyler's metaphor of flexing the arrow is exactly right. Right? The major shaping happens early. As time goes on, you polish, and then at the end, you're just testing. You're seeing, did I do the work right? Or do I need to restructure things? Okay, so let us talk about discipline and instruction in the home. Okay, so, but first, let's pour water upon ourselves. The basic principle is that discipline is discipleship, right? Discipline is discipleship. You are giving instruction. You are training. You're teaching. There is a sense in which when you are disciplining your children, you are enacting justice. There's a sense in which that's true, but it is by no means the primary thing. You're shaping the soul. You are teaching. So, when the child disobeys and you correct, what is the purpose of that? That is instruction, teaching, training. So, and this is what God does to us. He teaches and trains us by discipline, which is unpleasant. Most of our education is unpleasant. That is the way of it, right? Most of learning to play basketball is unpleasant. And then there's the bit at the end that's really fun. The training, Hebrews 12 tells us, is not pleasant for the moment, but it's sorrowful. But to those who have been trained by it, it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. You are seeking for your children to yield the peaceful fruit of righteousness. You want them to have joy. You want them to be happy. And so you are spanking them now. Right? I'm giving them momentary pain for the sake of eternal joy. Right? Momentary pain for the sake of eternal joy. Momentary discomfort for the sake of long-lasting peace and happiness. And this is hard work, but let me just say, if you do it well, and if you do it diligently, and if you do not shirk it, you actually taste the fruit much sooner than you would think. I rarely spank my 6-year-old. Why? Because I spanked him so much when he was 3. I did a lot of hard work. And even now, I'm enjoying the fruit of it. Right? So, again, my dad is a wonderful man, and he would always say, it's pay me now or pay me later. Right? Pay now or pay later. You can pay a little now or a lot later. But if you do pay a little now, you will be saved so much and have so much joy later. So that vision, I think, is helpful. Here are a few principles. One, and I've said this before, and I've said this a couple of times. One is assume that your child is more capable than you think they are. But what does that mean? That really means just treat your child like a person. Right? Begin with the end in mind. This is not a little squishy extension of me, right? This isn't just a little pet that I have that's kind of smelly and cute, but kind of loud too. But no, this is a person right here. They're small, but so are you in the grand scheme of things, right? They're a person. He or she is a person. Treat them like it. Talk to them like they are a person. Talk to them like they will be your friend someday, which, Lord willing, they will, which is glorious. And it's helpful. I say this to my wife all the time. Like, okay, they're in our house. Let's assume statistical averages. Let's say I live to be 80, right? Let's just say that. My child, I'm 20, okay? Let's say I have my child when I'm 20. then about 20 years for them reaching maturity. How old am I? I'm 40. So now I have a mature child for 40 years until I die. That means that the time during which my child is my friend is twice as long as the time which my child is in my house under my authority. Ooh, right? Begin with that end in mind, right? Think, so I am training this person who could one day be one of my closest friends. Does that change the authority structure? No. Authority can exist in the presence of friendship, right? But your child is more capable than you think. They are a person. They're a soul. They're picking up way more than you think they do, right? Some people think that they cannot train their children because their children are they don't know what they're doing. No, false. Their children know what they're doing almost all the time, right? Your children are more aware of their actions and your actions than you think is possible. Second principle, obedience to you is their main job. What is holiness for them? What is piety for them? It's obedience to you, almost in its entirety. As they grow and as they expand, they will have more and more outlets to show devotion to God. But as they are small, their chief, perhaps sole way that they obey God is by obeying you. Obedience is their main job. And it's okay to just acknowledge that and to accept that, right? You are to obey me. Why? Because by obeying me, you're obeying God. I am in this for a little while. I'm a stand-in for God. Someday I'm going to be out of the way, and you will obey God directly. Right now, I am mediating God's instruction to you. Okay? Embrace that. Accept that. That's a covenantal reality that is fundamental and for your joy. Okay. So, if obedience is their main job, right? If that's the instruction given to children, what does obedience look like? I think this is something that we say all the time. This is something that folks in our church say all the time, and I think it's really, really helpful. What is obedience? Obedience is right away, all the way, with a cheerful heart. If you want to keep the rhyme, every day. Right? Children, obedience is right away, all the way, with a cheerful heart, every day. And anything that is not that is not obedience. Right? So what are corollaries to this principle? Slow obedience is disobedience. Right? Grumpy obedience is disobedience. Why? Because what is obedience? It's right away, all the way, with a cheerful heart. This can be hard. It can be hard to enforce on your child. I would argue, take the thought experiment of you and God. How are you to obey God? How is your child to obey God? Are they to obey God slowly and grumpily? Or are they to obey God cheerfully and promptly? Right? And so you are given to them to train them how they should obey God. And if you, right, this is silly, but it may be helpful. Right? At the end of 18 years, right, you step out of the way and you're like, all right, God, I trained them. Now they're going to obey you. Oh, no. They are obeying you very badly. Right? When God comes to inspect your work, when he tests the arrow, right, when he gives them a command and they do not obey it, it's because they did not obey you. You trained them how they are to relate to God. It's a covenantal reality, and unless you grasp it, you are setting up your children to disobey God. Now, again, this can sound really arrogant. Okay? I am God to you, child. Right? Can that be done poorly? Of course it can be done poorly, so don't. Okay? Don't do it poorly. Right? But to say just because it can be done poorly doesn't mean that it is not still true. Right? Doesn't mean that it is not still true that you have been given to them to train them in obedience, so that they can ultimately step out, so that you'll step out of the way, and they'll obey God, and you then will obey God together. Glorious. So, Third principle, so first principle, your child's more capable than you think. Treat them as a person. They will be your friend one day. Second, obedience to you is their main job for this period. Third, what is obedience? It is right away, all the way with a cheerful heart every day. And then practically, how do you go about training your children? Here's a trap you can fall into. You can say, all right, obey me. Here's the law. You disobeyed, spankings, right? I did it, right? I instructed, they disobeyed, plain as the nose on your face, and now spankings, right? I'm doing my job, right? And that's, especially fathers can get into that mindset, like, check the box. The law, you didn't meet it. You're too short to ride this ride, right? Okay? And that's like 2/3 of faithfulness that can still totally miss the boat. Okay? And what's in the middle? Right? This was revolutionary when I first heard it. Like, oh wow, no, that is me. I'm very much thinking like, all right, here's the measuring stick. You're too short. Tough for you. Without remembering that, well, they're mine. I'm responsible for them. I'm responsible to give them what they need to obey. I'm responsible to train them to obey. Right? I'm asking them to make bricks without straw. I'm demanding of them something. He's 3, right? One of our pastors is fond of saying, and I love it, he just got here. Right? Right? He gives the example of like, this is like 3rd grade football practice, day 1. Right? They got the pads on and all running around like, they just got here. They don't know what to do, right? And so, did you give them clear instructions? Well, maybe. Maybe it was perfectly clear, but you didn't give them what they needed to obey, right? So practically, what does that look like? Here's a winner. A winner. The obedience game. Okay, this is a classic. Hopefully, you all know it, right? So what do? You go get your bowl of jelly beans, and you sit down. Or you go out in the front yard, you got your bowl of jelly beans, and it's basically Simon Says. And you give them instructions, and you say, run over to the tree. And they say, yes, sir. And they run over to the tree, and they come and get a jelly bean. And you say, roll over. And they say, yes, sir. And they roll over, right? Give them a jelly bean, right? And you do this, all these absurd, hilarious, funny things. What are you doing? You're training. You're drilling, right? You're teaching them how they ought to obey in the game, right? And what happens when they don't do it or when they're silly? Well, this is game time. This is practice time, right? And so if he doesn't run to the tree, you go, I don't want no jelly bean for you. And they go, oh, no, right? Yes, sir, right? But you're training that reverence. You're training that obedience. And so then when you give the instruction, they now have the muscles. They now have the muscle memory to obey, right? So you first instruct, you explain, this is the law. This is what you are to do. And then you train them, and you remind them, right? And this can happen informally. It doesn't have to be the obedience game, although that's a classic, right? But sometimes you remind. You be gentle, right? So in our house, we have 4 couches, and we have 3 that are in the living room and are a little bit nicer, and 1 that's in the family room and not so nice. And so that one's the bouncy couch, and the other ones are not the bouncy couch, right? Why? Mostly for the sake of having boundaries for me to enforce. That's also important. Right? Having artificial boundaries to enforce is part of training, right? Sometimes it's the stove. Don't touch the wood stove, right? That's not artificial at all. But the bouncy couch one, that's a little bit artificial, right? But what does it do? It means when my son comes and jumps on the bouncy couch, on the non-bouncy couch, I can say, whoa, is that the bouncy couch? He goes, oh, no, sir, it's not, right? Do you want to bounce? Yes, go on the bouncy. Okay, right? And so you have these. I didn't choose to spank him at that time. I chose to remind, to train, right? To practice. So having that in-between category between here's the law, you didn't meet it, right? Having that in-between of training, teaching, instructing, right? Practicing is essential. And this is what God does to us. Right? He is kind. He remembers our frame. He knows that we are but dust. We've said that a couple of times. I want to be clear. That's where that phrase comes from, know their frame. Right? It's from a passage in the Psalms that I don't know off the top of my head. But God remembers our frame. He knows that we are but dust. Right? He remembers that we are little people. Remember that your children are little people. They're little, but also people. Okay. And then finally, when the law is broken, you curse. When the law is kept, you bless, just like God does. Right? Blessings for obedience, curses for disobedience. That's another area we can forget. We can say, only the cursings. You disobey, and so you get the spanking. And forget that that's not what God does either. God punishes for disobedience, but he blesses for obedience. Right? So when your child obeys, when she eats the broccoli, right? Praise her to high heaven, right? Reward, shower blessings upon her head, right? When she obeys, when she does as she ought. Right? This is what God does, and so we model it as well. Let's think now for a little bit about spankings, because this is a thing that can be easily misunderstood, and the culture will lie to you all day about. But the spanking is given to us in Scripture as the primary means by which we instruct. Again, this isn't about retributive justice, right? This is about instruction, training, teaching, forming the soul, right? Again, one of our pastors has quipped, there's a direct connection between the soul of the boy and his backside, right? He is particularly teachable in that way. So is this biblical? Is it warranted? So the Proverbs are useful. Read the Proverbs. I think I already said that. But the Proverbs explain over and over again the duties of the father to educate, and specifically to educate by means of corporal correction. Let's see. 13:24, Proverbs 13:24. Whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline. Right? So if you think that it's loving to refrain from spanking, according to Proverbs 13, that's actually hatred. You hate your child, and that's why you do not spank them. Which, like, I don't hate my child. But if I don't hate them, why am I not doing this thing that is for their good? Why am I withholding this good thing from them? But he who loves him is diligent to discipline him. Proverbs 22:15. Folly is bound up in the heart of a child, right? Tyler quipped earlier, my child is a fool, right? Biblical. Folly is bound up in the heart of the child. They don't come innocent, they come fools. Right? Very cute fools, but fools nonetheless. Folly is bound up in the heart of the child, but the rod of discipline drives it far from him. And when you read this in the context of all of the Proverbs' instruction on the wise man and the fool is not happy. So if by the rod, if by judicious use of the spanking utensil of your choice, you are able to drive folly from their heart, you are giving them joy. You are giving them happiness. You are preventing them from making a train wreck of their lives. Proverbs 23, verse 13. Do not withhold discipline from a child. And I love this. It's like he was reading our minds. If you strike him with a rod, he will not die. If you strike him from the rod, if you strike him with the rod, you will save his soul. Again, we're talking about small discomfort now to avoid eternal pain. Right? We're talking small discomfort now to have eternal consequence. So, I don't think that you can look at the account of Scripture and come to the conclusion that it is neutral on the topic of spanking. I think that it is given to us as our duty as fathers. Let me give you a couple of, or an anecdotal defense of spanking. Something that, when my oldest came to the age that I began spanking him in earnest and not simply giving little flicks or something like that, which we'll talk about, I was shocked at what it did, because this is what I didn't expect. You spank the child, and then it's over. It's done. The thing is dealt with. The air is clear. I was raised with perhaps more, and my father was wonderful, and they instructed me well, but they didn't always have that one and done aspect. But rather my father's displeasure still hung over me, right? Or the time out, right? You are banished, and my displeasure is upon you. And then you come back, and my displeasure is still kind of on you, right? Or I'm going to ground you for 2 weeks. Ha! Now there's going to be a stink in our house for 2 weeks. This is misery. The beauty and glory of the spanking is it takes 2 seconds. And we taught the kids this from early days. All clean. All done. Right? It's over. And now we're back in fellowship. That idea of fellowship is essential. Right? Your house should be a place of peace, a place of fellowship, a place of joy. Right? And when there is sin, sin breaks fellowship. So how do you get back into fellowship? You instruct, you train, you bless, you curse, you bring repentance, you bring them back into fellowship. But the goal is always fellowship. Right? And we teach our children this. My wife is great about this. She uses the metaphor of, we are all, as a family, having a lovely walk along the hillside. And then when someone sins, they fall down the hillside into the swamp where the spiders are. They're out of fellowship. So you need to come back up. Right? And so we will bring you back up into fellowship so that now there is peace and there is joy again. And so the beauty of spanking is that it's over. We're back in fellowship. Right? And the punishment is small and short. It's truly lovely. It is loving as well. There have been times when, and this will sound strange, but there are times when I see, especially my daughters, not as much my sons, but especially my daughters, and they're just in a funk. She's just in a funk. Nothing good happening from that quarter these days. And sometimes I'll say to my wife, she needs a spanking. We need to find a reason to spank her. And so sometimes, it sounds terrible, but go with me on this. Sometimes we will give a situation where I know she will disobey, so that then I spank her. And it is amazing. Then she's happy. Oh. This happens sometimes in the middle of the night, too. A child will have a hard time falling asleep. They're just crying and crying, working themselves up, and they're yelling, and I've instructed them what to do, and they're still yelling and crying. And finally, I go in and I give them a spank, and they fall right asleep. There is peace. Right? So this really is loving. It really is kind. Okay. Now, again, this is correction, not punitive. It's not like, your offense merited this, and so I will beat you until the justice is done. It's correction. That is training. I'm going to teach you what you did, and I will teach it to you by spanking. Okay. The spanking must never be done in anger, right? And that's on you, right? So, and that's difficult, but spanking must never be done in anger. Period, end of story. If you are angry at the offense, you are not qualified to discipline your child. And so what do? You rule your own spirit. You say, all right, go sit in your bed. I will be with you a moment. You rule your own spirit. You get right with God. And then you are then qualified to attend to the discipline of your child, to the instruction of your child. Right? There's a funny thing that when you're qualified to spank, you don't want to. And when you are not qualified to spank, you do want to. Right? Right? But that's the way of it. Right? Rule your spirit. So that you model for them how to rule theirs. Practically, how does this look like? What's the process? So this will vary from case to case, but in general, there's sin. We were in fellowship, now there's sin. Okay, what do I do? First of all, you isolate the child as much as possible. You take the child and you bring them off by themselves. There's you and them. You understand the situation as best you can. Maybe it's plain as the nose on your face. Right? I said, don't, you did. Okay, well, that's not hard to understand. But sometimes it's more of like well, he hit me because I did this, and that was technically in response to that, and sometimes you have to do some sorting. But understand the situation clearly. Often we think we do, and we don't. So clearly understand the situation. You are here as an instructor, but also as one administering justice. Okay? And then ensure that the child knows the offense. Tell me what you did. I am about to spank you. Why am I about to spank you? Right? See if they understand. That is also where you will find the key, right? Where you'll find the most deadly thing of all, which is defiance. Right? Are they in rebellion against you or not? Oh, another passage I meant to bring up before. It's also in Proverbs. Still in 23, 22 through 26. Listen to your father who gave you life, and do not despise your mother when she is old. Buy truth and do not sell it. Buy wisdom and instruction and understanding. The father of the righteous will greatly rejoice. He who fathers a wise son will be glad. Let your father and mother be glad. Let the one who bore you rejoice. And this is one of my favorite verses. My son, give me your heart, and let your eyes observe my ways. Give me your heart. Do I have my child's heart? Are they with me, or are they against me? That fellowship is what I'm looking for, looking to maintain, right? So when you have the child try to explain back to you what they did, that's where you understand, do you have their heart? Do they say, yes, you said don't throw the pig, and I threw the pig, right? It's clear. Or they're like, no, don't know. Or this one. Like, give me your heart. What is this, right? It's like a splinter you've got to extract, right? We've got to get this out. Why? So that we can be in fellowship. So you get the child to articulate to you what they did. What is this offense? And then you chastise, right? This gets really, really practical, so I'm going to be specific. Spanking with a wooden spoon, not your hand, is ideal. Right? Have some sort of utensil. Right? The goal here is sting. You're trying to give sting, not damage. You're not trying to beat the child. You're trying to give sting so that it is understood that sin means pain. So you are trying to bring pain, but not bruising or welting or damage. No, right? And so that's where the sting of a utensil is particularly effective. Right? Bare skin is best. Right? Why? Because you're trying to give sting. You're trying to give a sharp bit of discomfort, right? When you try to spank through, a layer of jeans, a onesie, and a diaper, like, well, I could probably apply enough force to make this hurt, but I don't think that would be good, right? And so very practically, spanking on bare skin, I think, is essential, right? And this one is one that I've been chewing on lately, but a predetermined number, right? A predetermined number of spanks, which requires you to be a wise judge. Like, all right, this is a threefer. Right? I am going to give you 3 spanks. And they understand, they clearly, and then what does that keep you from doing? It keeps you from losing your cool, right? Like, well, that's not working, so let's just keep on going, right? And so it's a limiting factor for you, right? You say, no, this is, in my sober judgment, this deserves 3 spanks. I'm going to give you 3 spanks, right? And so you then administer what you think is appropriate to instruct the child on the severity of the issue at hand. And then they're crying. And what do you do then? Well, then you grab them, and you hug them, and you comfort them. And if they're small, you pull them up into your lap, right? And you calm them down, right? And if they're big, you just give them a good bear hug, right? And then you set them out there and say, now, confess your sin to God. And they go, I'm sorry, God, my brother. And sometimes you say, now let's say it to God without crying. Right? And you teach them to confess their sin. And then sometimes you say, now, and this is funny, but you do it, now confess your sin to me. You sinned against me. I'm sorry, Papa. Okay? And then sometimes we do all 3. Now, go find your brother. And go confess your sin to your brother. He's 6 months. Doesn't matter. Right? Doesn't matter. You're training. You're training. Go confess your sin. I'm sorry, Peter, for whacking you. He forgives you. Okay. Right? And then, so you confess to God. They've confessed to you, if appropriate, right? If the sin was against you. They've confessed to anyone else. And then, all clean. We're done. Right? Now, we re-enter the fellowship of the family. And there's peace and joy for 45 seconds. And then you do it again. Right? And that's life for you. Sometimes, okay? Sometimes that peace and fellowship that you've restored is very brief, and that is okay. That is okay. The work you've been given to do is difficult and challenging. That doesn't mean you're not allowed to do it. So this, I think, is a good template for how discipline, chastisement should look in the family. And also, sometimes you swoop down on them and you give them a spank and you put them back. Sometimes that happens too, right? So it looks different situations. But the principles of sin leads to pain, sin must be made right, sin must be confessed, These are all principles that you are instilling in them by means of the tool of instruction God has given to you, which is the rod, right? Can we sin with our attitudes? We can. You know it. You can sin against God with your attitudes, right? You can have a stinky heart towards God. Right? If you can have a stinky heart towards God, then so can your kid. Again, they're a person, they're a soul. So if you can have a stinky heart towards God, they can have a stinky heart towards you. Right? And if you let that go, what are you doing? You're just training them to have a stinky heart towards God. So, can you discipline for attitudes? Yeah. And you must. God does it to you, so you do it to them. That's just right and proper. What are the sort of attitudes that you are looking for? Major ones: whining, complaining, right? Whining, complaining, and arguing. Defiance. There can be sort of an inarticulate defiance against you and all you stand for, sir, right? And that has not technically crossed any line, but you can see it in every line in his body, right? And those are situations we have to tread carefully. But respect is essential for him, right? He must obey from the heart, just like you must obey from the heart. And so if he is disobeying you by being disrespectful, it can be strange to guard your own honor, to feel like I have to guard my own sense of dignity. And can that be done wrongly? Of course. Can you sin with anything? Yes. But remember, you are a stand-in for God. So if he's being disrespectful to you, if he's losing his cool with you, and you do nothing, you are allowing him to lose his cool with God. You're allowing him to defy God. Right? And that's no bueno. Okay. I've already gone over time, but I'm going to go a little farther. Lunch we'll have to keep. Because this all fits then into the broader picture of Christian education. So we are given the task of educating our children. And when they're teeny-weeny, it looks like mostly just what I just gave you, right? But as they grow, you have to provide for their more formal education, and that has to fit within the world that you are supposed to give them, right? It has to fit within the Christian worldview that you are to give them, that you are instructed by God to give them. So how do you do that, right? How do you give them a Christian education? Are you obligated to give them a Christian education? You are, right? You are. You're obligated to ensure that they have a Christian education, one that is in subjection to Christ. There may have been a time when that was possible in the public schools, and that time is about 150 years ago, right? It's gone, it's dead. The myth of secularism turns out to have been false. The myth of neutrality, also false. There is either Christ or chaos, right? There is either subjection to Christ or there is folly, futility, destruction, and death, right? And there was a time, perhaps, when the public schools when the influence of the public school could be mitigated by a robust involvement of the father and mother at home. And I just think that time is gone, if it ever existed at all. So you are to give your children an education. And for you now, what that means is, I think scripturally we must come to the conclusion that the public schools are off the table, which means your options for providing a formal education for your children are homeschooling or some form of Christian schooling, of which there's many that are better than others, right? And a Christian school that just does all the same things the public school does with the Bible class is not the same thing. Again, you're not supposed to just give them a Christian veneer over the top of what would be the same as they would get at whatever school anywhere else, right, from pagans. You are to give them a Christian world. You're to give them a Christian philosophy, worldview, not understanding just the things, but why the things are there and where they fit in the broad picture of Christ's kingdom. So we live also in an exciting time when there is this rebirth of classical education, and that may be a foreign concept to you, but it just means basically the education that Christians have been giving to their children for the last roughly 500 years, right? It is a mode of education based upon certain principles, but founded with the assumption that Christ is Lord. It's also based upon the principle of Proverbs 13:20, he who walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools suffers harm. So, Are you going to put your children in the company of fools or the company of the wise? If you put them in the company of fools, they will suffer harm. They will become fools. It's just mathematically a law. If you put them in the company of the wise, they'll become wise. Right? And so this is not just the wise of our current time, but the wise of the dead and gone. Right? The wisdom of our fathers. Right? So the classical idea of education involves associating with the wisdom of those dead and gone. The wisdom that has been passed down to us. Honestly, the classical education is just obedience to the fifth commandment, honor your father and mother. Right? You're to honor your father and mother. That doesn't mean just your parents. That means where you came from, the tradition you came from, who you are and what you've been given. Right? So a classical education seeks to give the students a understanding of the Christian heritage that we have. Right? And that means classic works of literature and history. It also means seeing everything in subjection to Christ. It is based upon a model of education that I think is relevant to some of the things we were talking about earlier. It's something that's called the trivium. It's a setup of education. What do you give children when they're little? You give them grammar, memorization, memorize the facts, take in, put back out. Right? When they're little, that's what you give them. When you get a little bigger, you give them logic, making connections between things, right? Saying, wait a second, if this is true, then that must also be true, right? And then what do you give them when they are old? You give them rhetoric, right? So grammar, logic, rhetoric is the medieval corpus, right, for what students were taught. Grammar, when they're little, memorization, rote, giving them things that they will be able to then make into tools during the logic stage, right? Connections, things, ideas. Wait, this means that means that. Aha. And then, when they are old, when they are mature, when they are about to graduate, they are now dangerous. They now are unleashed. They now have that breadth of knowledge, that breadth of training that will allow them to be terrors to the kingdom of hell. So, principles of classical education, this sequence of education that matches the form of the student. Also, integration, assuming we live in a fractured age where everything is separate from everything else, where disciplines splinter off into these weird spider webs where no thing is connected to any other thing anymore. A classical education assumes that everything is connected. Why is everything connected? Because it's all based upon Christ, right? If Christ is Lord, then he's Lord of math, and he's Lord of chemistry, and he's Lord of history, and he's Lord of art, and literature, and poetry, and all of it. It's all in Christ. He has something to say about all of it. So, what do we need to do? We must repent of our idolatry of neutrality, which is simply a rejection of Christ's lordship. If we claim that the thing is neutral, if I claim that this is no one's water bottle, when in actuality it is Christ's water bottle, I have denied Christ's lordship over the water bottle, right? Well, but wait, I said it was no one's. Yes, I know, but it's Jesus's. Right? He is Lord. So by claiming that this is neutral, I'm claiming that he's not Lord, which is defiance. So we need to repent of the idolatry of neutrality. We need to be shaping people, souls, virtues. We're not making cogs in a machine or pawns of a regime. It's often called a liberal education. Why liberal? Because it's free, for the free, right? It's the education that makes people free, and the education that free people can receive. So, in your context, your children are young. You do not have, as far as I know, any robust classical Christian school in the area. What are you all looking at? You're probably looking at homeschooling, right? Hopefully, and I would argue that and we could talk about this in the Q&A, but I would argue that that is almost certainly your duty, is to give your children a homeschool education. And if you can do that in cooperation with one another, that's all the better. If that cooperation can turn into a school, glory be to God, right? But the point I want to impress upon you is that it is your calling, your task, to give your children a Christian education. Now, how you do that before God is in some ways up to you, but I would argue that probably that means you're schooling them at home. So, husbands, do you have the resources for that? Wives, Are you prepared for that? Right? Those are hard questions. It's not an easy thing. But these are immortal souls. These are the children of the Lord that he has given to you for a period of time that's fairly brief. Right? And you are called to shape them. Not only for your pleasure, but for the glory of God and for their eternal good. It's a weighty thing. Heaven help us. Let's pray. Our Father, we thank you for your kindness to us. We thank you you've given us your word for our encouragement and our instruction. I pray that you would strengthen us for the weighty task of shepherding the souls of our children, for giving them a Christian education. I pray that you would build up your people here and that you would make them faithful. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, amen.